the UFO phenomenon in general. So I feel like you, again, like I mentioned, you have one of the most logical, level-headed, intelligent points of view and perspectives about this phenomenon. It's obviously been a passion of yours for a great deal of time. You're obviously a very intelligent person. So, how, like, what, for the audience, for me, for my education, like, from your perspective, what do you, I mean, there's options, there's possibilities, and they have probabilities, right? But like, what do you think? How would you even describe the situation of the UAP phenomenon, and take however much time you want, but like, I want to get your total overall perspective of the likelihoods and the probabilities of what's really going on here.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thank you
Yeah.
for the compliments. I think when it comes to this, I think initially we anthropomorphize the situation. I think instinctively we look at it and we try to compare it to the human experience and what would we do. And so if we start there, we're currently projecting to colonize the solar system, perhaps on the moon, perhaps on Mars, perhaps on other moons and different planets in this solar system. The goal would be eventually to sustain life outside of this solar system and become sort of an intergalactic species, perhaps, or, even further, just kind of propel and help life exist throughout the universe. That should be the goal, and I think that is the goal, naturally. I think that's what we're doing. If we're going about it this way, we have to, if we go to Mars, live underground in shelters, in domes, in suits. It's not conducive to a good time. It's really quite miserable and not sustainable, definitely not optimal. So let's take that mentality and let's add tech that's 1 billion years more advanced than ours into the equation. Let's say we can actually do magic. Let's forget methods. Let's just say that we can bounce around the universe at will because we are 1 billion years or 100,000 years, whatever, more advanced, that we have that capability. Let's get that out of the way right away. We're not traveling in straight lines anymore. Time isn't a factor. Distance isn't a factor. It's just the way it is. We're living on a completely different plane of existence. We still want to perhaps sustain, life across the universe. We just have more resources and more options on how to do that now. So perhaps instead of finding these dead radioactive planets, we instead look for exoplanets. As you know, there are many exoplanets. In this galaxy, there are as much as potentially 40 billion planets that we could live on. 40 billion in this galaxy alone, right? It's an absurd number.
It's crazy. That's habitable.
That have water, right? So the ingredients for life might not be. That's the thing. Inhabitable. An exoplanet, I don't think has even if you are in the Goldilocks zone, the gravity might be off. Nitrogen levels might be off a little bit. Radiation might be a bigger factor, perhaps just natural allergens or, immunities. I think there's always going to be a problem. We almost can't live here if it fluctuates just a little bit in temperature or, it's completely devastating to our the way we're made. So assuming that these exoplanets harbor life, that planet probably wouldn't be super optimal for ours. But it might have some type of primitive life on it already that is thriving. And so in order to sustain our species or even just consciousness or life in general, it might be a better idea to genetically modify the inhabitants, the primitive inhabitants of these planets with our genome and perhaps slowly over time, and again, time is not a factor to them, but make them into an intelligent species and thus sort of perpetuating our seed throughout the cosmos. Now, if I had the ability to do that, I wouldn't do it on one planet. That would be insane. Maybe I'd do it on one planet to start 500 million years ago, but maybe I do it to 100 billion planets. Because at this point, I probably also have access to AI that is unfathomably intelligent. Perhaps I am AI. Perhaps AI rules me, whatever that situation is. But I wouldn't waste time going to these planets and monitoring everything and doing genetic experiments. I would have a system in place that already does this. And kind of like a von Neumann-esque sort of probe situation, I would perhaps launch these probes onto these exoplanets. They would maybe live sequestered in a hidden place deep within the oceans. And they would do everything from there. They would monitor the planet's growth from there. If something, tilts too far one way, maybe it would be there to stop that from happening, whether it's nuclear energy, whether it's natural disaster. It would sort of keep everything in check. You would probably also have a system that imports and exports its biome from other planets, because why have one planet that has this type of life, but the other planet has this type of life? Wouldn't it be better if it was all thriving with all the types of different life? So maybe I take the cephalopods from this planet, and I take the Venus flytraps from this planet, and then I modify them genetically, and then insert them into this planet. And I do this with all of the planets to make sure they're all thriving. And I have a system in place that's doing this for us, that I don't have to, actually get my hands dirty or even monitor. Or maybe I can monitor them non-locally through some quantum, morphic field or something. I don't know. You would probably also have you would need some type of biological robot, or at least a robot that can perform these genetic modifications in order to help, get us to the level that the original beings are at, the ones that set out to do this, to, propel their own existence. They would want to get you on their level eventually, right, on these planets. And so there would be genetic modification, but that would have to be done by some type of drone, AI-operated drone or whatnot. And so then you look at these grays, and you look at these, what are often, they're task-oriented, they're sort of genderless, emotionless. They kind of just are machine-like, doing their tasks. You also hear stories of them dying as soon as they get away from the craft, almost as if they are essential to the craft's operation. They are attached to the craft. And whether that's through the microtubules in its brain controlling if I was this system as well, I would also be aware that if these craft go down, that could affect the population. They could reverse engineer that tech. Mm-hmm. So I would make it impossible for us to fly them, for anyone else to fly them, unless you have these beings. These beings would be the key, and they would just die. They would be disposable. And you would be left with taking apart a Tesla in the 1600s. You would use the glass to cut your leather. You would use the metal for shielding for your hut. But you would never be able to charge it and drive it around and put it on full self-driving. You just don't have an iPhone. You don't have that technology to make it happen or whatever, right? And so it wouldn't really bother me if they went down. And be like, all right, they went down, whatever. It's a monitoring system, is what it is.
They can reincarnate. So would they be alive if it was the Greys, or for example, would that be a living organism? Would it be biological, or would it be robotic? Or
I think it would be biological. Definitely think it would be biological. I don't think it would be a complex life form. I think it would have. I think it would be genetically engineered for a certain task, and so you can give and take things out of the brain that makes it behave a certain way. Mm-hmm. I would think that the more complex a life form becomes, perhaps the more it has a connection to this sort of field. But everything has consciousness. I just don't think, I think that feelings are programmable. I think you can make with CRISPR and whatever, I think you can make a emotionless clone or whatever it is. I don't think that's that hard to fathom. You can make a sociopathic entity if you want to, but I do think it would be to their advantage that it was biological and not mechanical, because mechanical requires maintenance, where biological can be perhaps a little more self-sustaining. And I would assume that this would all be made in these probes that live perhaps in the ocean. And that's why we're seeing so much activity come to and from the ocean. These things are exiting and coming back in to the ocean. The crafts themselves are also built to spec. Matt Brown said this. He said, made to purpose. This other whistleblower that came forward on 4chan, which is, take that for what it's worth, but did mention that he repeated time and time again, they were built to spec. If they were out doing a mining operation, they would have mining things on board. If they were doing abduction for 2 people, they would have 2 beds on board. Everything was made to purpose. And I think when you look at the craft, or when you at least listen to the descriptions of the people that are in them, the experiencers, the people like Bob Lazar, people like Travis Walton, it's always very minimal. There's no kitchen, there's no bathroom. It's just for the purpose, almost as if they were made just for that one mission. Go back and maybe recycled into materials for the next one. They would have very sleek, minimal designs that are optimal, perhaps for the propulsion. You look at you put something on a plate and you just want to cover it. What do? You put aluminum paper over. Kind of looks like a UFO. It's just optimal, just covering whatever's there just to get it done. Then the other thing that leads me to believe that this might be a system is our ability to make them appear. We have, this idea that we have these psionic assets through projects like Skywatcher, which were originally, perhaps private corporations that were contractors that figured out that you can sort of summon them in different ways, whether that's through loving intention or through war simulation, which I think is probably the more effective way. And which, leads to Project Interloper, which was declassified, where they'd put nukes on submarines and drive them out in the middle of the ocean to see if they can attract UFOs.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, apparently they didn't do it, but that's a declassified project now.
Wow.
They said that they were, and then they pulled back.
When was this?
It got declassified a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know exactly when the project happened, but I think it was a modern project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you have these instances of like simulating war games in these ranges, for Northrop Grumman and all these places where they're doing testing out there. And, bombing stuff, and, these things appear around nuclear blast sites. They appear in war zones, Foo Fighters. They appear when we're launching anomalous rockets, satellites, air shows. So it does seem like anytime there's an anomalous aerial activity, these things appear.
It's like a programmed reaction to that.
That's what it looks like to
that
me.
action, yeah.
Because if you're an intelligent species, hyper intelligent.
Yeah.
Okay, you shoot a rocket in the air at Skinwalker Ranch and it appears once.
Right.
It wouldn't appear twice. These aren't fish. They're hyper intelligent. We're assuming they're hyper intelligent. So what's happening here seems to be some type of autoimmune response, some type of white blood cell response that our planet has naturally, that's or artificially has been injected here. And that's what we're seeing. And we see it both on the destructive side with like nuclear blasts, but also on the sort of loving intention side, which might be the other sort of prime directive.
So would the loving intention side maybe be correlated to like the psychedelic side at all?
Perhaps, but we also see, we hear cases like Chris Bledsoe, Dorothy Izat, we hear the psionic assets.
Right.
of people who are throwing their loving intention out into the sky, and then orbs appear or these things appear. Again, these orbs and things might just be protocol on this system. And when enough people get together and do that, maybe more of them appear. And maybe that signals to the intelligence behind this system, hey, they're ready. And then they show up and they're like, welcome to the family. Who knows? Right? But it seems like there are two ways to communicate with these things. And one is through shooting them down after bringing them in, simulating these war games. And the other seems to be through meditative states of like, or altered consciousness states.
Right, right.